Kaya noticed the line before she noticed who was running it. 43 people deep, snaking back from the priority boarding desk at Gate 17 of Hartwell International, and every one of them moved, without hesitation, through the retractable barrier except her. The agent, a man whose lanyard read supervisor in block letters, looked at her boarding pass, looked at her, and then looked at the pass again, as though the document had made a clerical error. She was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, and her hair was loose because the elastic she kept in her left wrist pocket had broken somewhere over the Pacific 14 hours earlier. Her carry-on was a 30-liter canvas duffel, olive drab, the kind of bag that had been to places it was not allowed to discuss. She did not look like someone who belonged at a priority lane. She was aware of this. "This is the priority lane," the agent said. He pitched it loudly enough for the 4 people immediately behind her to hear. Nobody behind her said anything. One woman in a camel coat shifted her wheeled case slightly to the left, already beginning the geometry of stepping around. Kaya told him her ticket was priority boarding, Tier 1, and she handed the pass back. He read it again, as if expecting it to have changed. Then he said, slowly and in the same carrying voice, that perhaps she wanted the general boarding area, which was back the way she came, near Gate 12. The woman in the camel coat found something to examine on the ceiling. A man in a blazer turned 3/4 away and checked his watch. A teenage boy sitting on a seat behind the crowd put his phone up and looked at nothing on it. Kaya did not raise her voice. She did not explain. She simply held her hand out for the boarding pass. That was when she shifted the duffel to her opposite shoulder, and the sleeve of the flannel shirt rode up 2 inches, and on the inside of her left wrist there was a narrow metal bracelet, worn smooth and dark with age, with a name and a number engraved on its face. Not her name. The man who saw it was standing 12 feet away, to the left of the gate agent, in the loose linen jacket of a civilian traveler, and he was already in the process of lifting a paper cup of coffee toward his mouth when he stopped. He stopped completely. The cup came back down. His jaw did not tighten so much as it stilled. He read the bracelet from 12 feet away with the particular precision of a person who already knew how to read that kind of bracelet, and something moved through his expression that was not pity and was not anger. Someone in this terminal was about to have a long and very clarifying morning. Before we get further into Kaya's story, if you have ever been somewhere you absolutely earned the right to be and been treated like you wandered in by accident, drop the words "earned it" in the comments and hit subscribe. Because what happened next at Gate 17 began a long time before that terminal. In a part of Kaya's life, most people in that building would never have the clearance to understand. Kaya Solis was 38 years old. She was wearing a flannel shirt and carrying a duffel bag, and she had not slept in 18 hours. And the last time she had been inside Hartwell International, she had been 22 and in uniform, and it had been a different terminal entirely, the old one, the one they tore down in the renovation of 2014. She grew up 40 minutes east of here, in a town called Marengo Falls, in a house that her mother still lived in, and she was going back there because her mother had asked her to come, and because it had been 14 months since the last visit, and because she had finally, after some internal argument she did not describe to anyone, agreed that 14 months was too long. The ticket had been bought on a Tuesday at 11 at night from a hotel room in Manila. She flew Manila to Seoul, Seoul to Vancouver, Vancouver to Hartwell, and she was 7 hours from home by the time the agent at Gate 17 decided she did not belong in his lane. That was the shape of the morning. The terminal at Hartwell International had been renovated twice since Kaya last moved through it in any regular way, and the result was a building that could not decide whether it was an art installation or a departure hall. The ceiling in the main concourse was 40 feet of angled glass and pale wood. The floors were a pale stone that caught every scuff. There were coffee stations at 30-foot intervals, and each one had a small handwritten chalkboard sign above it, with something meant to be quietly inspiring, the kind of sentence that was not wrong exactly, but that had never once been earned by anybody who wrote it. Gate 17 sat at the far end of the east concourse, against a window that looked directly onto the tarmac, and in the early morning light, The aircraft lined up outside looked gray and enormous, and entirely indifferent to the minor theater occurring 12 feet from the boarding desk. The priority lane at Gate 17 existed because the airline, Crestline Pacific, had a tiered boarding structure that began with passengers in their top 2 fare categories, plus any active-duty military personnel traveling in uniform. The system was clear. It was in print on the boarding pass. None of that was the complication. The complication was a man named Douglas Farron, 51 years old, who had held the title of gate supervisor at this concourse for 11 years, and who had, over those 11 years, developed a working model of what a first-class or priority passenger looked like. The model was detailed and confidently held. Kaya did not fit it. Farron was a man of process who had confused his process with his judgment, and there is a whole category of person who makes that substitution without ever noticing the moment it happened. He handed her boarding pass back. He told her again, with the patient cadence of someone explaining something to a person who had missed it the first time, that she might be more comfortable getting in the general queue. He gestured with his free hand toward the far end of the corridor, away from the gate, away from the window, away from the pale stone floor and the glass ceiling and the aircraft outside that was going to leave with or without her preferences. Kaya took the pass. She looked at him for 2 seconds without speaking. She said, in a voice that did not carry past the immediate 3 feet between them, that she would wait. Farron blinked. He had not anticipated that word delivered in that register. She did not wait at the barrier. She stepped to the side, set her duffel on the ground, and stood next to it, with her hands at her sides and her weight balanced evenly on both feet, the way a person stands when they have learned, in practical contexts, that the most efficient use of energy is to expend none of it on anything that is not immediately required. The camel coat woman passed through without looking at her. The blazer man passed. The teenage boy with the phone was not in the priority queue and had not moved at all. Farron watched her for a moment, and then turned back to the lane, satisfied with an outcome he had mistakenly authored. The man 12 feet away, who had not moved and had not touched his coffee since setting it down, watched all of this. He was 64 years old. His name was Gideon Marsh. He was wearing civilian clothes because he was traveling on personal time, and the linen jacket had been a gift from his daughter and fit him the way clothes fit people who are used to wearing something more structured. He was in Hartwell because he had a connection to Portland, and he had 40 minutes before his gate opened, and he had been drinking mediocre coffee and reading a physical newspaper because he still preferred them. He had been a Rear Admiral in the United States Navy for 6 years before his retirement 14 months ago. He had been other things before that, for 27 years, in places that did not appear on the newspaper he was holding. When he saw the bracelet on Kaya's wrist, he set the cup down, and he folded the newspaper, and he stood up. He had recognized the number. He had recognized the name. He had known that name. The bystanders settled back into the comfortable busyness of a terminal between flights. A woman at the nearest coffee station stirred her drink without drinking it. The teenage boy resumed his phone. The blazer man had found his seat near the window and was staring at his laptop with the focused expression of a person who was not reading anything. Farron was back at the desk, processing the remaining priority passengers with the efficient momentum of someone who has resolved a situation. He had not resolved anything. Gideon Marsh crossed 12 feet of pale stone floor without hurrying and stopped 1 pace from Kaya. She looked up. He was a large man, broad, the kind of build that stays in the shoulders long after everything else softens. He was not in uniform. He did not need to be. "Sergeant Solis," he said. He did not say it loudly. He said it the way a person says a name they have been carrying for some time. Kaya went very still. Not the stillness of surprise, the stillness of something arriving that she had stopped expecting, and then found she had never stopped expecting at all. "I'm retired," she said. "So am I," he said. There was a silence between them. It was 3 seconds long, and it contained more information than most conversations hold in an hour. "I knew Marcus Teal," Gideon Marsh said. The bracelet on her wrist was smooth and dark, and the name engraved on it was Marcus A. Teal, and below the name was a service number and 2 dates. The second one being the 14th of March, 11 years ago. Kaya did not look at the bracelet. She did not look away from him either. She said, "He never mentioned you." "He wouldn't have," Marsh said. "He was careful about what he carried into theater." He looked at the boarding desk, and then back at her. He said, "You have a Tier 1 pass." She said yes. He said, "Come with me." Not as an order, as a statement of what was about to happen. Before I tell you what Gideon Marsh did next, if you have ever carried someone's name and found that someone else was carrying it too, drop "earned it" in the comments right now. Because the reason Kaya had not defended herself at that desk, the reason she had not said a single word in her own favor, the reason she had simply stood to the side and waited with her hands still and her weight balanced and her face arranged in the particular patience of someone who has learned the difference between a battle worth fighting and a performance of one, that reason had a name and a service number and 2 dates, and it had been on her wrist for 11 years. Marcus Teal had been 26 years old. He had been a staff sergeant, and he had been from a town in southern Ohio called Piketon, and he had had a specific and terrible laugh, the kind that started silent and then arrived all at once, and Kaya had served alongside him for 4 years in the kind of close professional proximity that makes the boundaries between trust and something more complicated very hard to locate. She had been a sergeant, then a staff sergeant herself, attached to a forward operating support element that did logistical coordination work in places she was not going to name in a terminal, and Marcus Teal had been her team's senior NCO, and they had been 29 months into a 3rd deployment when the 14th of March arrived. She did not talk about the 14th of March often. She had told the full account to exactly 2 people in the 11 years since. Her mother, once, in the kitchen at Marengo Falls, at 2 in the morning, and a counselor at a Veterans Affairs office in Portland, in a small beige room, with a plant in it that was doing its best. She had not talked about it to anyone she had served with. She had not talked about it to the people who filled out the forms, or wrote the letters, or determined what the official account contained. The official account was accurate in its facts and incomplete in its texture, the way official accounts tend to be, because official accounts are written for record rather than for understanding, and the 2 projects do not always produce the same document. What the official account contained, Staff Sergeant Marcus A. Teal, on the 14th of March, during a vehicle recovery operation, sustained fatal injuries. The account listed the coordinates, the time, the weather, the personnel present. It listed Sergeant Kaya Solis as the senior remaining NCO who assumed coordination and directed the subsequent extraction, which was completed without further casualties. It used the word completed. It did not explain what completion required. It did not explain the 41 minutes before the extraction arrived, or the 14 individual decisions made in those 41 minutes, or the fact that she had been speaking to him for the last 22 of those minutes because he had asked her not to stop talking and she had not stopped. And she had been out of meaningful things to say by minute 9, and had moved on to telling him about her mother's house in Marengo Falls, the kitchen with the yellow curtains, the maple tree in the backyard that dropped its keys in the fall, and how her mother never raked them up because she said they looked like confetti. She had told him about the maple tree 3 times in 22 minutes, and he had not told her to stop. She had put the bracelet on 3 days later, not because someone gave it to her. She had ordered it herself, from a small supplier that made them for exactly this purpose, and she had paid $47 for it, including shipping, and she had put it on her left wrist on the morning of the 17th, and she had not taken it off in 11 years. She did not wear it as a statement. She wore it because she had decided, in a calculation she did not explain to anyone, that he would travel with her. Gideon Marsh had known Marcus Teal because he had been his uncle's commanding officer in a completely separate theater, 12 years before that deployment. And Marcus Teal had mentioned him once in a letter home, and that letter had survived, and the uncle had mentioned it to Marsh at the funeral, and Marsh had remembered. He had looked up the after-action summary 6 months after his retirement because he had the time to do the things he had not had time for, and the name Solus appeared in it, and he had noted it with the specific and quiet acknowledgement of someone who takes attendance for the right reasons. He had not expected to take attendance at Gate 17 of Hartwell International at 7:40 in the morning. He had not expected a great many things that had turned out to be true. Gideon Marsh walked back across 12 feet of pale stone floor and stopped at the desk. He did not raise his voice. He spoke at a normal conversational volume, and Farron turned to him with the practiced expression of a man accustomed to handling complaints from travelers who felt aggrieved. Marsh said that the woman standing to the left of the lane was holding a Tier 1 priority boarding pass, and he would like Farron to confirm that and process her now. Farron said that the situation had been addressed. Marsh said he understood, and he would like it to be addressed again. Farron's expression shifted through 3 states in 2 seconds: irritation, assessment, and something just below the surface of alarm, because there was a quality in Marsh's tone that was entirely without heat and entirely without room. It was the tone of a person who had spent a very long time giving instructions in contexts where the instructions mattered. Farron looked at Kaya. He looked at Marsh. He looked at the linen jacket, which was not a uniform, and then he looked at the way Marsh was standing, which was. He said he would need to see her boarding pass again. Marsh said, "Of course." Kaya handed the pass forward. Farron read it. He scanned it. The light went green. He said with a flatness that was the closest he was going to come to an apology at this particular moment, that she could proceed. She picked up her duffel. She walked to the door. Marsh walked beside her, 3 feet to her right, not ahead of her, not behind her, beside her, and the 6 remaining priority passengers, who had watched the entire exchange without acknowledging that they had watched it, found very suddenly that their phones and their newspapers required their complete attention. The teenage boy with the phone looked up and watched them walk through the door. He was the only one. The jet bridge was dimly lit and smelled of recycled air and the faint industrial sweetness of aircraft fuel, and their footsteps were the only sound in it. Kaya said, "You didn't have to do that." He said, "I know." She said, "I would have waited." He said, "I know that too." They reached the aircraft door, and the flight attendant took their passes. Marsh's seat was in row 4. Kaya's seat was in row 5, 1 row behind, 1 window away from his. They did not sit together. That had not been the point. The point had not been comfort. The point had been that the 14 people in the priority lane who had watched a woman with a Tier 1 pass be directed to the back of the terminal now watched a man whose entire bearing communicated 40 years of high-consequence service walk that same woman to the door without explanation or fanfare, and what they understood from that, they understood without being told. Kaya put her duffel in the overhead compartment and sat down and looked out the window at the gray light on the tarmac. She pressed her right thumb against the bracelet on her left wrist, the way she did sometimes, when something shifted. She did not think about what had just happened. She was already thinking about the kitchen in Marengo Falls, and the yellow curtains, and the maple tree, which would be dropping its keys in 3 more weeks, because it was October, and October was what October was. The flight to Portland took 1 hour and 52 minutes. Kaya slept for most of it, the specific flat and dreamless sleep of a person whose body has been overruling their intentions for approximately 18 hours. She woke 12 minutes before landing, which was what she always did, as if something inside her kept time, even when the rest of her had gone quiet. Marsh was in row 4 with the newspaper. He was on the back half of it now. He did not look back at her. She did not need him to. At Portland, the bags took 23 minutes, which was 1 minute longer than the screen had promised, and 4 minutes shorter than she had anticipated. She collected the duffel from the belt, and turned, and Marsh was standing 8 feet away, with a smaller bag slung over one shoulder, the kind of soft-sided bag people use when they are trying not to look like they still think in terms of what fits in a pack. He said that Portland was a connection for him, and he had 45 minutes. He asked if she had a moment. She had a moment. They sat at a small table near the arrivals exit, an undecorated table near an undecorated wall, with the sound of rolling cases and automated announcements in the background, and he told her what he had come to say. He told her that he had read the after-action summary and 3 supporting documents that were not included in the summary. He told her that those documents contained testimony from 2 other personnel on the ground that day, testimony that described the 41 minutes before extraction with a specificity that the summary had not included. He told her that a formal review had been opened 11 months ago, in the quiet administrative way that formal reviews opened, without notification to the people named in them, and that the review had concluded 4 months ago. He told her the conclusion. He told her the conclusion in plain language. He did not soften it, and he did not expand it. He said that the review board had found that the coordination decisions made during that 41-minute window had been, in the specific language of the document, of a standard consistent with the highest traditions of the service, and that a recommendation for a commendation citation had been forwarded and approved. She had not known. Nobody had told her. He said that was partly why he was telling her now, because it had been approved 4 months ago, and the paperwork had sat in a system she was no longer connected to, and he had found out 6 weeks ago through a colleague and had wanted her to know. She looked at the table for a moment. She looked at the window beyond the table, where the gray Portland morning was doing what gray Portland mornings did in October. She said, "He stayed calm the whole time." She was not talking about herself. "Yes," Marsh said. "He did." There was a silence. It was longer than the one in the terminal. It held more. She said, "I told him about a maple tree." She said it without explanation, without context, and Marsh did not ask for any. He said, "He would have liked that." She pressed her thumb against the bracelet. "He hated raking," she said. It was almost nothing. It was the closest she had come to laughing in 18 hours. The commendation citation arrived by mail 6 weeks after Portland, at her forwarding address in Vancouver, in an envelope with a government return address that she opened over a kitchen sink because she was washing a cup when it arrived. The language was formal and specific and used her name and Marcus Teal's name in the same paragraph, which was the thing she had not expected. She read it twice. She set it on the counter and finished washing the cup. 3 days later, she called Gideon Marsh on the number he had written on a piece of paper at the Portland table. She did not call to thank him. She called because there was one more thing. She asked whether the review documentation, the testimony from the 2 personnel, the formal record of what happened in those 41 minutes, was accessible in any way to next of kin. Marsh said he would find out. He found out in 11 days. The answer was yes, with a formal request submitted through the records office. She submitted the request herself. She addressed it to Marcus Teal's mother, whose name and address she had carried in a small notebook since the year she got out, the same notebook where she kept things she was not willing to trust to a device. The records office transmitted the documents. She did not know what Marcus Teal's mother did when she received them. She did not need to know. She had sent them because she had decided, in a calculation she did not explain to anyone, that his mother had been waiting 11 years for the texture of that morning, and the texture was now in a document, and the document could travel. The review board's formal record was classified, but the summary and the citation were not, and the citation included his name and the phrase "distinguished conduct under sustained duress," and the name of the unit and the date, and that was enough to make the story permanent in the way that only official language can make a story permanent, which is to say, in the way that loses the maple tree but keeps the man. 4 months after the citation arrived, Kaya was back at work. The work was logistics coordination for a civilian shipping firm with contracts in the Asia-Pacific corridor, and she had been doing it for 3 years, and it suited her because it was procedural and precise, and she was good at it, without needing anyone to know she was good at it. The office was in Vancouver, in a building that looked out over the water, and it was a good building to work in because the water was always doing something, and you could watch it without anyone thinking you were not working. There was a new analyst in the office that November, a woman named Priya, 24 years old, who had been there for 3 weeks and was the kind of person who asked the questions other people decided not to ask. Priya had heard the story from a colleague who had heard it from someone else, and the version she had heard involved considerably more confrontation than had actually occurred. One afternoon, she stopped at Kaya's desk and asked if it was true that she had argued with a supervisor at an airport and an admiral had backed her up. Kaya looked up from the document she was reviewing. She said that a gate agent had made a mistake about which line she was supposed to use, and a man who happened to be nearby had helped clarify it. Priya considered this. She said, "That's not the version I heard." Kaya said, "That's the version that happened." Priya looked at the bracelet on her wrist, which was visible because Kaya's sleeves were rolled to the elbow. Priya did not ask about it. She was young, but she was perceptive enough to recognize the particular quality of an object that was not meant to be explained. She said, "Can I ask you something else?" Kaya said yes. Priya said, "Were you ever scared that nobody would see it?" Kaya understood what the question meant. She understood that Priya was not asking about airports. She was quiet for a moment. She looked out the window at the water, which was gray that afternoon, moving without urgency toward the shore. She said, "Someone always sees it. The question is whether you stay long enough to be there when they do." Priya was quiet. She went back to her desk. Kaya went back to her document. The bracelet on her wrist was smooth and worn in the way of things that have been carried a long time, and the name on it did not need to be read aloud to be present in the room. If you have ever watched someone be dismissed from something they had more than earned, this story was for them and for you both. More stories about the people who carry their history quietly and the rooms that eventually learn to read it are coming every week. We will keep telling them. The weeks that followed had the texture of ordinary time, which is to say, they were filled with small decisions and unspectacular tasks, and the particular rhythm of a life that has found its level after a long period of turbulence. Kaya drove to Marengo Falls on the second weekend of November. The maple tree in her mother's backyard had dropped most of its keys by then, and her mother, who was 66 years old and had been saying for 4 years that she was going to hire someone to deal with the yard, had not hired anyone. The keys lay in a thick, pale layer across the grass, which had gone the yellow-brown of late autumn, and the tree itself stood bare and unhurried against a sky, the color of old pewter. Her mother's name was Renata Solis, and she was a small woman who cooked in large quantities and asked few questions directly, preferring to approach the things she wanted to know by way of other things, the way you approach a window from an angle to see what is inside without being seen looking. She had made a soup with white beans and ham, and she had set 2 places at the kitchen table with the yellow curtains. The same yellow curtains that had been there when Kaya was 9 years old, and that Renata had washed and rehung every spring for 29 years without anyone suggesting she change them. They ate without talking about anything important, which was its own kind of talking. Renata asked about the flights. Kaya said they had been fine. Renata asked about the work. Kaya said it was steady. Renata refilled her bowl without asking whether she wanted more. After dinner, they sat with their cups at the table, and the kitchen was warm, and the light was the amber of a single overhead bulb that Kaya had been meaning to replace with something better for 3 years, and had not replaced. Renata looked at the bracelet. She had looked at it on every visit for 11 years, and she had not once asked about it directly, because she already knew, because Kaya had told her in this same kitchen at 2 in the morning, a week after she got out, and Renata had sat through it without speaking, and then had put her hand over Kaya's hand and left it there for a long time. Now Renata said, "Did something happen? Not about the airport, not about the Admiral, about Kaya." The way mothers ask the version of the question that gets to the actual question. Kaya said, "A review board found a record of it." Renata was still. "Of Marcus," Kaya said. "Of that day. What happened? They wrote it down properly." Renata set her cup down. She did not say anything. She did not look away. Kaya said, "His mother got the documents." Renata breathed in through her nose and held it for 2 seconds and let it out. She said, "Good." It was one word, and it was the right word, and it landed in the kitchen with the weight of 11 years behind it. Kaya pressed her thumb against the bracelet. The maple tree outside the window was invisible in the dark, but she knew exactly where it was. The formal commendation was entered into her service record in December, 63 days after the envelope arrived. She received a confirmation letter from the records office, a 2-paragraph document on official letterhead that confirmed the entry and provided a reference number. She kept it in the same notebook where she kept Marcus Teal's mother's address. She did not frame it. She did not photograph it. It existed in the record, and the record was permanent, and that was the purpose of records. She did not tell anyone at the shipping firm about it. Priya noticed, sometime in late January, that something in Kaya's posture had shifted in a way that was difficult to name, not that she had become more relaxed exactly, more that she moved through the office the way a person moves when they have finished checking for something they had been checking for, without realizing they were checking. Priya said nothing about this, because she was perceptive enough to know that naming a thing can sometimes undo it. The airport story continued to circulate in the office, with the expanding and contracting logic of all office stories, each version a little larger than the last, each teller adding the detail they found most necessary. In the version that reached the shipping firm's operations manager, a retired 4-star general had personally escorted Kaya through security, while the gate agent was removed from his post. Kaya, when this version reached her by way of a colleague who relayed it with some amusement, said only that the coffee at Hartwell International was genuinely mediocre, and she did not recommend it. She meant the comment as a deflection, and it functioned as one, and the conversation moved on. Gideon Marsh sent a note in February, an actual note, handwritten on cardstock, mailed from Portland, where he had apparently settled after retirement. It was brief. It said that he hoped her work was going well, and that he had submitted a recommendation to the Veterans Advocacy Review Panel that a new logistics coordination position within the panel's support structure be named for Staff Sergeant Marcus A. Teal, in recognition of the qualities the position required, which were precision, steadiness, and care under pressure. He said the recommendation had been accepted. He said the position would be formally designated by the end of the fiscal year. He wrote his phone number at the bottom of the card in case she had misplaced the other one, which she had not. She read the note twice. She set it with the confirmation letter in the notebook. The notebook was a spiral-bound thing, 60 pages, 2/3 full, that she had bought in a stationery shop in Portland 7 years ago for $3.49. It was held together with a rubber band because the cover had separated from the spine, and she had not replaced it because the notebook was the notebook. She wrote Marcus Teal's mother a second letter that month. Not a long letter, a short one, 4 sentences, telling her about the position and its name. She mailed it from the post office on her lunch break, in an envelope she addressed by hand, and she stood at the slot for 2 seconds before she put it in, the way she sometimes stood at thresholds to confirm the direction she was going. The position was designated in April. The official notice was posted on the Veterans Advocacy Review Panel's public records page, a quiet corner of a government website that received approximately 43 visitors a day on average. Kaya found the listing on a Tuesday evening, sitting at her desk in the Vancouver office after everyone else had gone home, with the window behind her, showing the water in the last of the daylight, copper and gray and moving. The listing was 3 lines. It gave the position title, the designation date, and the name, the Marcus A. Teal Coordination Fellowship. 3 lines. His name in a public record, attached to the exact kind of work he had been good at, permanent in the administrative way of all things that are entered into official systems by people who are paid to maintain them, which is to say, permanent in the most durable way available to ordinary human endeavor. She stayed at her desk for 11 minutes after reading it. She did not do anything during those 11 minutes, except sit with her hands flat on the desk and look at the water. Then she closed the browser, shut down her computer, picked up her bag, and walked out of the office into the April evening. The air outside was cool and smelled of the water and of something green beginning. She walked to her car. She got in. She sat in the car for a moment with her hands on the wheel, and then she did something she had not planned to do, which was to say his name aloud, once, in the quiet of the car, the way you say a name when you want the air to hold it for a moment, before everything moves on. In May, Priya asked her for advice. Not about work, about whether it was worth staying in a field where the work you did was constantly attributed to someone else, someone more visibly qualified, someone who had the right look for the room. Kaya listened to the full question, which took 4 minutes to ask and contained 3 separate examples. Then she said that the work you do builds a record whether or not anyone is reading it, and records are patient. And the question is not whether to keep doing the work, but whether you have found work that is worth the patience. Priya wrote this down. Kaya was not sure it was the answer Priya needed, but it was the honest one, and she had stopped giving other kinds. She looked at the bracelet while Priya was writing. The metal was worn in the particular way of things that have been touched for 11 years by the same hand, and the name on it was still clear, still legible, still exact. She had never considered having it repolished. The wearing was the point.